Hello and welcome to the She is Courageous podcast, your weekly reminder that courage comes before confidence and mindset is where it starts. I'm Shelley, business mindset coach, helping women to stop holding themselves back and start showing up boldly in business, work, and of course life. This podcast is your nudge to ditch the self-doubt, quieten the overthinking, and take action that builds real confidence. Because she is courageous and she is you. Hello and welcome back to the She is Courageous podcast. Now, I'll be honest, I wasn't planning on recording today. And if you are watching on YouTube, you will be able to attest to that because I have not done my hair. I'm just run into my bedroom and popped some lippy on in an attempt to distract you from the state of it today. My hair, as many of you know, I had my hair cut into a shorter bob. Cool. Probably 3 months ago now, and I've currently got the most ridiculous little ponytail going on because I couldn't be asked to wash it this morning. But anyway, that is not what you tune in for, but I guess it's my way of reminding us that actually we don't have to be perfect to do these things. I've always said with this podcast that part of why I still record at home in my office now rather than paying for a studio and like sometimes I go to other people's podcasts and I just want to be in a studio doing this for us. And it's not just about the investment, by the way, because I bet that's what you're thinking. Actually, I wanted to show that we can do anything. We can remove all the excuses. So if you are currently sitting at home listening to me this week and having that thought that you often have around, I'd love to do a podcast one day, you can. And apparently you don't even need to look good. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's get into this week's episode of the She is Courageous podcast and why I've jumped on even though I wasn't actually planning to. So last week, I was having a conversation with my husband and he was telling me about a conversation he'd had with one of his team members. Now, I'm not going to go into that conversation, but fundamentally, he was sharing with me they'd had a loss in the family. And he started talking about how he'd asked them how they were. And he said, look, I know, because they'd said they were fine. They were back at work and they were fine. And he said, I just want you to know that it's okay if you're not okay. And what he then went on to tell me was something I didn't actually know. So he shared with me that he had shared with his team member this. Guy sadly lost both of his parents in a very short space of time. And less than 12 months, in fact. And anyone that knows Guy will know he is very pragmatic. He's very good at compartmentalizing. That's maybe a man thing. He's very good at kind of putting his feelings to one side. And his mantra during the time that we were dealing with the illness of his parents and the loss of them was simply, well, it is what it is. Because that was his way of coping with things. And after his mum passed away, he said, look, it is what it is. We've just got to get on with it. And a lot of people didn't understand his behaviour. He very quickly dealt with things. He dealt with clearing the house. He dealt with what we need to deal with because he just needed to get back to normal. He needed to get back to normal, inverted commas, life. And so for him, we just need to get on with it. We need to get home and get back to work. And he was, there was many people that really admired how well he coped with it. But actually, what I didn't know until he told me this story of him and his team member was that a few weeks after he went back to work, he was in an ordinary meeting in an ordinary shop. He used to work for a well-known high street food and beverage business. He was in one of his shops. And he was in the middle of a meeting and someone asked something. And I think they might have asked him how he was doing, but fundamentally, I don't know because he didn't really tell me this story. But he then said that in that moment, he was so completely overwhelmed and it all came up and he had to literally walk away from the meeting, walk out of the store and actually go home. It was all too much. It had caught up with him. And as I was listening to him, I did not know that story, by the way, but that's a whole other conversation. As I was listening, I was wondering, I found myself thinking about, at that time, I was the one that kept saying to him, you've got to deal with things, but I'm a talker, that's my way, right? We all have different ways of dealing with things. But what if actually we're not dealing with things? Because the reality was that happened because he didn't simply deal with what he needed to deal with. He didn't become, suddenly very adept at dealing with the challenges. And by God, did he deal with some challenges. but actually he delayed dealing with it. He postponed dealing with it. Now, this is not a podcast about grief or loss. This is about actually that conversation had me realising I see this all the time. I see it in so many women I work with. I see it in my clients, I see it in my friends, I see it in people on Instagram, if I'm honest. And yes, as always, I never talk about anything that isn't real for me too. I've seen it in me. This piece about, are we handling something or do we postpone dealing with it? Because I think we pride ourselves on getting on with it. And there's so much narrative around us about keep moving forward. And I say that, yes, absolutely. But I don't say keep moving on without dealing with what you need to deal with. So whether it's, a business launch that didn't go to plan, whether it's, people go through redundancy situations, maybe it's divorce, caring for aging parents, difficult decisions in businesses that actually have consequences, friendships ending, health scares, rejection, disappointment. I could go on, but my point is the pattern's always the same. Something difficult happens, we seemingly deal with it, and then we just go back to it, whatever it is. And in most cases, we get back to work. And that might be literally or metaphorically, but we seem to deal with something and we get back on with it. We get back into answering emails, getting meetings in the diary, supporting everyone around us. We keep producing, we keep functioning. And I think what I want you to ask yourself today as you listen to this is whether you've noticed or whether you've ever noticed how quickly you move on. Now, I talk about this quite a lot in my coaching world in terms of not acknowledging our achievements. We're so quick to move to the next thing, the next goal. But actually, this is about some of the challenging stuff. And I don't want this to become a negative podcast episode. It's never meant that way. But I won't do toxic positivity and pretend this stuff doesn't go on either. So my big question today is, what if moving on isn't the same as moving through? That's what I want to talk about today. Now, as always, let's talk about why. Why do we do this? Why do we move on rather than move through it? Well, simply, I've heard me say this hundreds of times. Your brain is trying to protect you. Your brain's job is to keep you safe. Your brain's job is to keep you alive. Your brain's priority is not healing. It's survival. I say all the time, we love certainty. Our brains love certainty. And when life feels uncertain, our brain looks for certainty to make things better, to make us feel safe. And very often what is familiar is action, movement, solving, planning, productivity. I'm a planner, I'm a problem solver. That is what I do. When we're in the midst of stuff, I try and problem solve. Now those behaviours, they're great because they do reduce uncertainty. They help us come away from not knowing and take back, I guess, a level of control. That's why we reach for them. It's the number one thing people do. The first and foremost reason that we do this, that we don't deal with, we just move through, is because our brain is trying to protect us. And I say it all the time, your brain is built to work with you. But the other thing that I think we don't realise is actually we've been rewarded for moving on, not moving through. If you think about life generally, if you think about life today or maybe even your past, I wonder how often have you been praised for being so resilient, so dependable, always so calm in a crisis? How often have you been rewarded for being so capable, for being the problem solver, for being able to put a plan together, for being the one who just gets on with it? As the eldest of four, I have kind of carved out that role for myself. I'm the one that gets on with things. I'm the one that deals with stuff. Those qualities have helped me build my career. They've become part of my identity. Maybe they have for you too. And that means that when life gets challenging or hard, your brain reaches for the strategy that's always worked. Not because it's the right strategy, but because it's familiar. And if it's been rewarded as well, that's like double win. Of course, I'm going to be the resilient one. I'm going to be the dependable one. I'm going to be the independent one, whatever it is. And if you think about it, I talk about labels all the time. And we wear our labels for a reason. They don't always serve us, but we tell ourselves they do. But there's another thing that I think is going on here, and I think it's as simple as this. Stopping means getting uncomfortable. So when we're dealing with challenges, and remember, like at the heart of this, so I use those words already. Have you ever noticed how quickly you move on rather than move through? Fundamentally, this is about me challenging us around whether we handle something or deal with it. That's basically what I'm talking about here. And I think that we handle things because dealing with it means we need to stop, and that's really uncomfortable. And guess what? Our brain doesn't like discomfort. If we stop and really face into something, that space leaves us alone with our thoughts. I say that as a positive often. I will say to people, if I'm talking about retreats and things, there's a brilliant quote I've used for retreats that is, when we give ourselves space to simply be, clarity emerges for us to see. Now, that's a real positive, but sometimes we don't want the clarity. Sometimes we don't want to see what's really going on. We don't want to be alone with our thoughts. Sometimes that's the very thing we're trying to avoid. And actually, if I think about, and as I said, this is not a podcast about grief, but if I think about the journey that we experienced when Guy's parents were ill, he didn't want to think about it because thinking about it was too hard. So it's easier to get on with it. It's easier to answer another email. It's easier to start another project. It's easier to help someone else. It's easier just to keep going. And this is where mindset comes in, okay? Because while you're busy handling a situation, what we're not paying attention to is we're also, in the background, subconsciously deciding, what does this mean about me? And that's the bit we don't notice because it's subconscious. Now, I've already mentioned labels and what we make those labels mean things about us over the years. But fundamentally, when we're in the midst of situations, whatever they are, we start to play according to the rules that we've set about ourselves. I have to be strong. I can't rely on anyone else. I need to prove myself. I need to prove that I can do this. I can't let anyone down. I've got to stay in control. It's the only way that I'll get through this. I don't have time to fall apart. I mean, there's a classic line for women. But they're not facts. They are conclusions that we draw for ourselves, conclusions that your brain has made while trying to keep you safe. And unless you challenge them, they become the lens with which you see yourself and make all your future decisions. And that is why mindset matters. This isn't about the practicalities of dealing with challenging situations. This is about the mindset, not the mindset that says you've got to be strong and you've got to be resilient, but actually the mindset of dealing with things. The mindset of dealing with things rather than just handling things. Which is why this podcast episode is called Handling It Isn't the Same as Dealing with It. Now, maybe this has really got you thinking. Maybe you're going through something right now. I want to be really honest with you about the consequences of just handling things, of just handling life rather than dealing with what life is bringing you. I have worked with so many incredible women who have held everything together during, let's call it what it can be most of the time, a crisis. Who've continued to grow great businesses, to keep everyone else and everything else afloat. And then, in the months after, and it might be months, sometimes it's even a year later, they've completely crashed. And not because they've become less resilient, but because they've never actually caught up with themselves. Because it doesn't just get okay once the crisis has passed, it's still there within us. And the reality is that the consequence of this can end up looking like burnout later down the line, constant exhaustion, because we're still carrying. Perfectionism, still trying to be everything to everyone, or actually still catching up, needing to stay in control, finding it hard to trust those around us because they weren't there for us when we needed them, even if we didn't tell them we needed them. Over-functioning in every single area of life, waiting for the next crisis, the next problem, never fully feeling present, and wondering why they still don't feel okay, even though, inverted commas moment, bunny ears on the YouTube, life is back to normal. The event, the crisis, the situation, the challenge has ended, but the beliefs haven't. Now, this isn't me saying you have to stop being capable. You don't have to become less ambitious in life. You don't have to stop handling difficult things. Yes, this title, I want to be really clear about this phrase, handling versus dealing. This is not about being any less of anything that you are that's working for you. It is about how we need to stop assuming because we've handled something, we've dealt with it. Because they are very, very different things. That's not very articulate, is it? But handling it and dealing with it are not the same thing. Now, there's a lot more to this, but I just found myself really compelled to come on and talk about this. And if this is something you're experiencing right now, I would strongly urge, if you have not got someone in your corner supporting you to kind of pick at the scabs and get underneath the skin of some things. I know I'm biased, I'm a coach, right? I'm not even saying I'm the woman. But, find your person, whether that's a friend or a coach, mentor, or a therapist. You can't go through life just handling things. We have to start dealing with things because that's how we are able to put things to bed. And dealing with things enables us to let go of beliefs that aren't helping. Remember some of those things I've said? I have to be strong. I can't rely on anyone. I need to stay in control. I don't have time to fall apart. They're beliefs. That doesn't mean they're true. So what I'm actually going to do is just bring in my good old faithful courageous mindset formula. I'm just going to remind you of that really simple framework that I always use. Catch, challenge, change. In this instance, in terms of catching yourself, what have you been handling that you haven't actually dealt with? What are you handling that you haven't actually dealt with? Because you're just handling it. You're just trying to get through. Not just the thing. This is not just about what's happening because that's the external. It probably is an external situation, circumstance that you can't change, but the impact it's having on you. As hard as this is to say, because I know it will be hard to hear, you can change the impact it's having on you, but you have to notice it. You have to catch it first. And that's when you can challenge it. What are you telling yourself because of this? Not what is happening or what has happened, but what have you made it mean? What have you decided? What have you decided about you as a result of this or in the midst of this? And again, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm not enough. I have to work harder. I can't trust anyone. I'm going to have to. I just need to. What are you saying? Because you have to challenge that. Is that really true? Where's the evidence that that is the absolute truth? What else could be true? Two things can be true at the same time. What else could be true? What else could be true today? What do you need? What would be more helpful? Challenge your own thought process because that is how you change. That is how you change how you are handling, how you are thinking, and that is how you deal with things differently. Changing our beliefs is not easy, but it starts with catching what the current belief is that's not helping and challenging it so that we can go, do you know what? I don't have to think this. I don't have to believe this. I may have a really large part of me that still believes it, but I could also believe this. And that doesn't mean the experience, the situation, the circumstance doesn't matter. In very many cases, it really does. But it's because you don't want the experience, that situation, to define who you become, who you are. So what belief would serve the woman you're becoming, rather than the version of you who is simply trying to get through? That's where real change begins. Looking back, Guy would have 100% told you that he thought he was coping well. What he realised, he would have told you that's just the way he is. He would have told you that's just what he needs to do. He just needs to get on with it. But what he realised in those coming weeks was that he'd just become really good at carrying on and just getting on with it. But that wasn't truly dealing with what he needed to deal with. And it wasn't that just by walking out of that meeting and giving himself space in that day it was all dealt with. It was then a process after that. I just wonder how many of us are doing exactly the same thing. At work, at home, in life, in business. Life is going to ask us to handle really challenging things. It's inevitable. Business is going to throw really challenging things at us. Our teams are going to throw really challenging things at us. But that doesn't mean that we have to let our ability to keep functioning convince us that nothing has affected us. True self-leadership is true self-awareness, and true self-awareness is being okay with where we're affected too and dealing with that. If we just keep pushing it to one side or pushing it down, it's just building up. Because handling it will get you through the moment, but dealing with it will shape who you become afterwards. And that's what I want to leave you to think about today. As ever, if this episode has resonated for you, if it's really got you thinking, oh my word, I'm handling it but not dealing with it, let me know, reach out to me, give me some insights to what this has brought up for you. And if you do need a hand with that, my door is open, my inbox is open, and maybe it's time to seek the support that's right for you. As ever, I will leave you with my closing words. Remember this: she is courageous and she is you.